What do you think of when you think of a house? Is it a safe space and room to breathe, or a suburban nightmare? In many places across the world, owning your own home is the ultimate sign that you've made it.
We were socialized to want the single-family house and the green lawn and the pool in the backyard and the garage.
The problem is it's caused their car-dependent lifestyle.
This is not great news for the planet. These carbon-intensive boxes can be pretty inefficient and encourage car use. They're draining many cities of affordable housing and exacerbating inequality. We've built so many houses that it's using up precious land. And in some places, the pandemic has ramped up demand for even bigger homes away from city centers.
How did it happen in the span of a single generation? What can be done to reverse the tide and preserve the land?
So let's take a look at where the dream to have a house even comes from. Are we able to shape our desires differently, or is the solution to build better and make more out of what we've got? Before we jump in, what is a single-family house? Generally speaking, we're talking about a detached house on its own piece of land that doesn't share walls, utilities, or entrances with any other residences. In the US, the post-World War II period made the house with a yard and a white picket fence an attainable middle-class fantasy.
15 million GIs clamoring for new homes and a piece of land in the country.
Millions of veterans had come home from the war, and the government guaranteed generous loans for white families to settle into newly constructed houses outside city centers.
Almost overnight, suburbia was born. 500,000 homes sprang up around the country in 1946. Nearly 1 million in 1947.
But wait, a housing boom for whom? The government guaranteed generous loans for white families. It was white families who settled in the suburbs, which led other white families to also leave city centers.
Some of that anti-urban kind of instinct was actually tied to the tail end of the Great Migration and movement of African Americans from the South into central cities.
This is Dr. Harley Etienne, a professor of urban planning.
Underneath all of this, this is all sitting on a bedrock of the unspoken racism of not wanting to move to the center of cities. That created a really particular vicious cycle of disinvestment in cities, but then, investment in suburbs and the expansion of the suburbs.
This exodus of white people into suburbs was eventually dubbed white flight. And since public services are largely funded through property taxes, it deprived inner-city communities of funding and social services. Elsewhere, the end of the Second World War marked independence from many countries in the global South. And a lot of those places modernized their cities based on Western examples. Even in places like Thailand, which wasn't directly colonized, the West was still a benchmark for aspiration.
In modern cities, nowadays, I observed that the pattern and also the design of middle-class house is adapted from Western culture.
Amado Jantarangse is a sociologist whose research focuses on housing in Thailand.
Like modern house or English-style house, which show the luxury status and higher status.
And thus the single-family house became a global trademark for wealth and belonging. In this Beijing suburb, developers made the houses look so identical to Vancouver homes that a newspaper made an online quiz to see if you could tell the difference. Of the 140 million housing units in the United States, roughly 85 million are single-family homes. In Croatia, almost 70% of the population lives in detached houses, the highest percentage in Europe. These numbers are terrifying for the planet. Construction alone emits tons of CO2, from the raw materials themselves to the transport, as well as energy needed on site. Studies have shown that building a single-family house emits roughly 385 kilos of CO2 per square meter. That's like 10 round-trip tickets from New York to Havana just for my living room. Just to give you an idea, residential energy use accounts for roughly 20% of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. Some studies say that multifamily households use up to 47% less energy than a single-family home. And by the way, how are you going to get from your job to your home? If you live in the suburbs and public transportation sucks, that's going to be by car.
There are lots of parts of the US where to just leave the house to get a quart of milk could involve a 5-mile drive, could involve a 10-mile drive. Many communities and jurisdictions, don't build sidewalks, towards their towards subdivisions and within them.
That's one of the reasons why Bangkok cannot cope with traffic jam and conditions. People still need to use car because of their long distance between working area and housing area.
Not to mention the carbon footprint of all the things you need to put in the house and the equipment to maintain the lawn, the garden, the landscaping, and the driveway. Did you know that a lawnmower emits as much emissions as a car?
People who buy in large quantities and truck it away in their cars. It's a big market.
But really, the list of damage goes on. Reduction of arable land and biodiversity because of land use, and worst of all, social inequality.
Does it make sense for a single person to live in 5,000 square feet when so many people live on, so much less? You think about kind of dense housing in Manila or Hong Kong, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Why are you entitled to that in certain parts of the world and certain parts of the US, the West, and global North?
So why is it so hard to change the status quo? Well, for starters, housing is deeply political. Zoning is the set of laws in urban planning that dictate how land can be used and what can be built where. And who makes those laws? Politicians.
Zoning laws, originally designed to police the use of land, were contrived to raise higher and higher the minimum size of lots.
In many American cities, it's actually illegal to build anything other than single-family homes in certain places. In San Jose, California, for example, 94% of residential land is zoned for single-family houses. In Los Angeles, it's 75%. Almost half of Jakarta is still zoned for low-rise buildings, the majority of which are single-family homes. Most of Bangkok was zoned in a way that pushed housing to the outskirts of the city.
The government want to promote tourism in Bangkok, and the way they did it, relocate people in the old town to the other place.
In the US, the government and banks shaped cities by excluding non-white populations from mortgages in a practice called redlining, which persists to this day.
Redlining basically says, well, we'll guarantee mortgages in certain areas based on who's there. Basically, if the area is predominantly African-American, then we're going to rate this neighborhood, and we're going to downgrade it and consider it red and not guarantee mortgages here. But then in others where the population was predominantly white, they would guarantee the mortgages.
Some say white folks did it. Keep us from going on their side of the creek.
Similar exclusionary zoning already existed in cities like Johannesburg, Dhaka, and Jakarta as legacies of colonialism, creating slums and siloed neighborhoods. Bad zoning often creates housing scarcity, which today is pushing city rents to unaffordable rates all over the world.
The rent is too damn high.
Gated communities in Jakarta, for instance, inflate land and property prices. This encourages high-income households to buy multiple properties and not rent them, just so the value appreciates over time. So fixing zoning laws would be a huge step towards more equitable housing. Minneapolis, Minnesota got rid of single-family zoning in 2018, for example, and San Francisco is also planning on it. But we can't just blame zoning full stop. A lot of planners say what's needed is to build out the missing middle. This means other types of single-family housing structures like duplexes and townhouses that support walkable communities with local retail and public transportation. They're also often more affordable and produce less emissions because they retain heat better. As every planner will tell you, housing is about so much more than just houses. It's about improving public transportation, investing in schools, and developing underused urban areas to increase density. We also have to examine our consumerism and actually confront systems of oppression that sustain the interests of those in power at the cost of the marginalized.
If you could take social difference and injustice out of the equation, it would be a lot easier to reach consensus on what we have to do.
Some places in the world have managed to minimize the urban sprawl. The city-state of Singapore, which was a British colony for 144 years, is often touted as the golden child of urban planning. Over 80% of the population lives in mostly vertical public housing, with decentralized neighborhoods designed for pedestrians and supported by mass transit. If you want to buy a car, you'll have to pay some huge taxes, so that discourages auto ownership. But Singapore is a small city-state island. The government owns 90% of its land, and all these measures happened because of rigid state regulation.
I think that we have to reimagine our social imagine has to expand. The diversification of the images of our housing need to change. I mean, I don't think that people recognize how predictable and safe the formula has been.
Every place has its own particular history, culture, geography, and demographics. So what makes a good house is a really relative definition, and one that's always evolving.
So let's talk about your neighborhood. Do you know what kind of zoning it has? And how do you think we could change our social imagination? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. See you next time.